So thank you for joining me today. If you're looking at this video, then obviously you're thinking about children returning to school after lockdown. I'm not going to get into the when is it the right time to go back to school, because that is a hot potato, so I'm not going to get involved in that. We're just talking, or rather I'm just talking here about what we're going to be doing in terms of preparation for when it is felt safe to go back. So that having said, I'm going to put that issue to one side and start talking about some useful strategies. So I put out a request on social media for parents and teachers to contact me with issues relating to children returning to school. Now, some of these were in the form of highlighting issues, and some of these were in the form of asking questions. So I've used these to structure my answers or suggestions, and then I'm going to talk about what parents can do. I'm going to talk about what teachers can do, and then I'm going to just to sort of validate the people who sent in their questions. I'm just going to list the questions that were put in by. I've selected a large number of questions, and I'm going to read those at the bottom if there's time. When I say bottom, I mean the bottom of my page, because there is no bottom of the video. And then I've got some references. I will provide a link in the description below this video, which will give access to a PDF document. So that will be a thing. So here we go, preparing what parents can do. So one of the most important issues is it's about normalising school return. So we're ensuring that children are ready to return by normalising the idea of returning to school. So I've got some suggestions for the way that we would normalise the notion of school. So it can be done in a number of ways, and these are things that should be kind of done incidentally to slowly introduce the idea of returning to school over time, rather than saying, right, tomorrow it's back to school. Basically introduce the notion that we're going back to school as the opportunity arises. If you hear something on television mentioning about school, kind of confirm that we are going back. If you're having a conversation about something and a child brings up school, then start talking about school, the idea that we're going back to school. You can introduce it sort of subtly by saying, when you go back to school, what are you going to want in your lunchbox? There's sort of like introducing a certainty, or I'm going to the shops today, and if I go in the stationery aisle, do you want me to pick up some pens or something like that? So it's really about just normalising it. Vis-a-vis resources, it's a really good idea to start making the resources obvious. And what I mean by that is, like, put school clothes in an obvious place, start washing them, hanging them up, putting them neatly somewhere, because that will set the idea that we're going back to school. Say, have you seen your school bag or your lunchbox or your pens? And then kind of put them in a place. Readiness. I mean, you don't even have to mention anything about it, but it's just that reinforcing that idea. It's really, given that children are now going to be going back into a situation where they've been prohibited from going to, because it's been regarded as aversive or dangerous, then we need to start talking about the situation positively. We need to say, yeah, well, we're going back to school and all the provision will be in place. And what you don't want to be doing is sharing your concerns inadvertently by saying, by leaving the TV on with lots of terrible news, or having conversations with friends and partners about your views on coronavirus, and then saying something completely different to your child, because they're going to see straight through that. Also, you can ask young people, what are you looking forward to about going back to school? What have you missed doing? Who have you missed seeing? What have you missed most? Trying to get them to have some sort of positive memory of school rather than thinking of it as a dangerous place. This is what we need to avoid, is getting, encouraging the thought that it's a dangerous place to attend. It's also important to encourage young people to reconnect with their friends, and especially reconnecting with them in a positive way, focusing on returning to school. They can find out what their friends have been doing. Will they be on the first day, etc., etc. In a similar vein, it's useful to get young people and children to list what they're looking forward to about going back to school. So you can, didn't you enjoy such and such? Are you looking forward to, I was going to say playing football, but I wonder if football's actually going to be something that's allowed when they go back. So it has to be something that would be compliant with any distance regulations that the school has been setting up. But, chatting with friends, doing certain school-based activities that they might enjoy. And also, it's important to actually acknowledge what concerns children might have about returning to school. Rather than catastrophizing them and making children think, they raise an issue and you go, I know, it's terrible, isn't it? Rather than doing something like that, it was worth saying, I wonder what we can do about that concern. So also it's important not to say, when a child says, I'm worried about sitting in class because I might get infected with the virus, rather than saying, don't be silly, or that's never going to happen. You can acknowledge their worries and kind of demonstrate a commitment to solving whatever problems that they raise, obviously within your capabilities of doing so. And if there was a question relating to some sort of school process, you might say, I don't actually know about that, but when we get back in, we can ask Mr. Jones or Miss Jones or Mrs. Jones, or whatever. You can encourage your child to work out a solution for themselves, or you can help them with a solution, or you can illustrate where that solution might be obtained from. So that would be asking for somebody in school for help. This is important for teachers, parents, and young people. It's what's happening on the first day back. That's what everybody's going to be worried about. And if it's not sorted out in a way that makes it clear for everybody what's going on, hand washing, direction around school, what class I'll be in, how I'm going to eat my lunch, when my playtime is, how far to sit apart for different people, whether people will be wearing PPE, whether my own teacher will be in, whether my key worker will be in, am I going to be in my usual class, all those kind of questions. As many of those as possible need to be answered. And if there's any specific rules, for instance, you will need to wash your hands every time you leave the classroom, for instance. I just made one up. Then children need to know those, because that's going to be a source of potential conflict, because they'll keep forgetting to do it. So you might want to say what the rules are to your child, and then say, oh, can you remind me what the rules are? Or tell me what the rules are, or put up a picture of the rules, or can they draw the rules, or whatever. Just something so that they're kind of vaguely embedded into their kind of way of thinking. So referring to rules, if there are social distancing rules at school, which I'm sure undoubted there will be, it would be useful to get to know these as soon as possible in order that your child is aware of them. I'm imagining most schools will probably put a load of information on websites explaining exactly what those rules are, and if they haven't done so, it's very worthwhile contacting the school. I'm sure they're going to be deluged when it's clear what's going on, with other parents making the same request, and so they may just eventually end up putting something up that explains everything, or sending out a letter, or sending out an email. I mentioned hand washing earlier. I am assuming that each school will adopt a different style of hand washing practice, majorly similar, but there may be differences to do with the layout, or the numbers of children, or the facilities available. Find out what's going on. Find out what your school has decided, and communicate that to your child. Let them know. If there has been some sort of visual instruction provided by the school, or written instruction, then maybe put that somewhere in the house that's obvious. If you think that your child may not kind of get the hand washing process, it's probably not a good idea to go, right, we're going to try this hand washing process. You could do it incidentally. That's probably more likely to be less kind of a point of conflict or resistance. You can do it when a child is at the sink, like maybe they're brushing their teeth, or they're washing their hands after or if they're in the bath, you could say, how are we going to wash our hands when we go back to school? This is what school have shown. You can show your child following the instructions. So rather than expecting them to look at the instructions of the school, or which might be written, or it might be a visual description, or it might be something from National Health, you could say, oh, well, I'm going to show you how to do it at whatever time seems most reasonable. Praise them for good hand washing skills. I know it sounds a bit American, but just say, oh, well done, that was good, I like the way you did that, yes, you could do that again, or whatever. And whilst you're doing it, try and do it in a light-hearted way that isn't kind of yet another thing to alarm them about going to school, because obviously there'll be lots of individual children who have got additional needs that are thinking about germs as a potential source of threat. I've worked with lots of children who, even at times when there hasn't been this current high level of concern, or where there's been concern abroad, they have become incredibly anxious, affecting them at school and causing school refusal and refusal to go out into the school community. So try and avoid alarming children about the situation. Just do it in a matter-of-fact sort of way. Talking of worries, if you feel your child is kind of anxious about any of this, it's not going to be just your child, it's going to be, school teachers, everyone's going to be worried, and that's understandable. But in order to kind of get a grip on what your child is worrying about, it's often useful to have a worry box where children can write their worries. You can write it for them and put it in the worry box. It's just a way of, it's just a sort of a mechanism for enabling them to discuss their worries on a sort of a scheduled basis. So like, is there anything that you want to put in the worry box before we go to bed? If they put it in and don't want to talk about it, it may be that you can have a look at what they've written in the worry box, or you can talk about it at the time. It's really important, as I mentioned earlier, to validate whatever they're feeling. It's okay to feel worried. It's okay to feel angry. It's okay to feel scared. It's okay to feel sad. And then you can start helping your child process whatever those emotions are, rather than saying, don't be silly, it's going to be fine. I mean, obviously that works for some of the issues, but if you're giving the child the message that their concerns aren't valid, then that can lead to sort of internalising of anxieties. I mentioned uses of kind of visual strategies earlier, and these can be useful in extended sort of ways. A visual strategy is so much better than a spoken one, because obviously a spoken reminder, you say it and it's gone, but with a visual reminder you've got a picture that's there, and if you put it in a strategic place, like on the fridge or by the door or in the bathroom or wherever it's appropriate, child's door, child's bedroom, then they will look at it from time to time and it will subtly become embedded. So with that in mind, some useful activities might be to make a collage of the school. I mean, you can download pictures off the school website and use those as the basis of a representation of your school, and children can stick on their drawings of their friends or photographs of their friends or things that they can remember from school. There are often pictures of school staff on the website. Cut those out, put it on. Pictures of the playground, pictures of any bits and pieces relating to school, and that might be something useful to leave somewhere, because basically kids are going to go back to school at some point and they need to start thinking about it, and it's just a way of gradually embedding it. Also, this is really quite important, and it may not be possible up until a certain point. It's about a timeline of school return. Ideally, this should be started, quite a while back, but we're currently looking at an uncertain start for children. As far as I understand, June the 1st has been put forward for certain year groups to return. School unions, rightly or wrongly, or understandably, are concerned about the likelihood of reinfection and the difficulty of social distancing and so on. That now June the 1st date is now hanging in the balance. But as you could just do something that is an approximate timeline, which has now, perhaps, in June, you could put a symbol in there for may go back to school, and then when it becomes confirmed, put it in as this is a possible date, this is a definite date, but certainly a way of helping children come to the terms with the fact that the very long school holiday that they've just had is over. So if you relate this back to summer holidays and how difficult it is for children to get back into school after summer holidays, then we need to start preparing children, because there's going to be lots of school refusal, there's going to be lots of anxiety, there's going to be lots of arguments on the first day, etc., etc. I know there will be children who do want to go back, but lots of children with social communication difficulties, global developmental delay, social speech language communication needs, and autistic spectrum disorders, attachment disorder, those who may have had bereavement. A wide variety of children are going to be finding it difficult to start, and this is what we need to support. Another issue is consider writing a social story about my return to school story using the Carragher format. I simply haven't got time to go into doing a story, my return to school story here, because that would take another half-hour video in itself. So those of you who know it will be able to use it, and those of you who don't know it yet, have a look online and please follow the proper guidance. It's more than just writing a story. It's got a particular format. There's 3 types of words: descriptive, perspective, and directional words. And there's a ratio of the words that you need to use in order to write a proper social story. So consider that. This is a really big one. So imagine this next issue is a really big one. Imagine you're a child and you've been going to bed at 10 o'clock at night and getting up at 10 o'clock in the morning. That the first day back to school is going to be a nightmare. So you're going to be not wanting to go in, and you're going to be tired, and you're going to be anxious. So all of those 3 difficulties are going to conspire against a good day back. So it's really important to start trying to adjust the bedtimes back to normal. So you can talk to your child, say in a few days we're going to start pulling the bedtimes back. You're going to go to bed a bit earlier each day, and here's the timeline of it. And it'll be a battle, but it needs to be started, because there's going to be nothing worse than turning up on the first day and everyone's going to be ragged from tiredness. Other points to help children be less fearful about returning to school: you might want to draw a world map and pinpoint where other children have returned to school. I would only do that if when you look at the map there are lots of children going back to school. If that hasn't happened, or then it's going to make it more difficult, but that was just a thought I'd had. Another way of helping children with more visual sort of prompts is a visual checklist of resources that they need to go back to school, and put them in a prominent place. So you could draw and then visual resources are so much easier to make now than they have been in the past, because you can just take a photo of an object, possibly the object that the child owns, and then photograph on your phone, print it out, and then put it on a little chart, and then you can just keep adding items as you think about them, and then again that reinforces, here's some stuff, we're going to be going back to school, this is what we need to do. So also it's really important to think about life once social distancing has finished, because all we're doing at the moment is focusing on the sort of immediate negative stuff. So it'd be really useful to have something nice to do once we're able to interact without any of the social distancing rules. It would be nice to give an example of something that you might want to do, and say, when we're able to do things that aren't related to social distancing, then we will do X. We might go, we're going to go to a trip to a wildlife park, or we're going to go and see Granny in Skegness, or we're going to do something nice, that because what you're doing there is you're focusing on a time when the current situation has finished, or that it is certainly less, perhaps. If returning to the hand washing stuff, if appropriate and not alarming to your child, and what I mean by that is that for some children, having lots of pictures of hand washing instructions on the wall might make them more anxious. But if your child is able to cope with that kind of thing, you want to get some hand washing pictures and their instructions, maybe from school or the general NHS ones, and put them around whatever space you have left from after putting up everything else that you're going to be putting up, but again in another prominent place. This was something that I thought the other day. So we're all going to need to reinforce social distancing. So I don't actually have the actual game, but I have an idea for a game which might reinforce it, because you can make up this game really easily with your own rules. Make a game about guessing how far 2 meters is in distance. So it could be, you could be throwing a beanbag into a box, you could be choosing a stick of a certain length, or a skipping rope of a certain length, or standing whatever you reckon is 2 meters away from a wall, like when you play What Time Is It, Mr. Wolf? Do something like that, and that will give children the impression of what 2 meters is. You may not want to say, oh, this is a game for social distancing, but you may just want to start practicing that ability, because for some children they may not be able to understand what 2 meters is. It's all well and good teachers saying, well, 2 meters, you've got to stand 2 meters away, but if they don't know what 2 meters is, then we're going to be starting off the new term, the return to school phase, with lots of children being told off for poor hand washing, with lots of children being told off for standing too far away from everybody else, or too close to everybody else, and actually it's for no other reason than they haven't quite embedded it yet. Another visual strategy is to get a picture of your child's key worker, if they indeed have one, and ask your child to label the picture with things that they like about the key worker. This then gives a positive view of going back to school. It reminds them that they like this person. It has lots of sort of benefits, but it's just another thing about, we are going back to school. This is a thing about going back to school. It's about, as many references to returning to school as possible, and in this case this is a positive one. And you could also list questions that your child would like to ask their key worker on returning to school. I'm sure they probably have their own, but it's always useful to have some positive openers, because that will immediately re-establish the link between the key worker and your child, which is really important, because they're going to be the link within the school. Of course, if your child doesn't have a key worker, you could just have a picture of your class teacher and do the same things. Well, I don't mean just, but you could equally have a picture of your class teacher, of your child's class teacher. That depends on you knowing who each of these individuals is going to be, etc., etc. So obviously I'm giving you the ideas, but the finer detail has to be consistent with whatever has been provided with school. Another one which is really important, because this will distress a lot of children, display a picture of any new classroom layout, if at all possible. You might have to start asking your school if they will put pictures of classrooms on websites. You might have to ask your school if they'll put a plan layout of the classroom, where all of the tables are, where all of the chairs are, whether your child's going to be in their old classroom, in a new classroom, in a classroom that they've been before, in a classroom they've never been before, in a space that's not actually in a classroom, in a library, all of those kind of things. You may be able to get some images of the school from the school website, or do your best to remember, but I mean, it's really important to have kind of as accurate information as possible, because that's really going to throw children. Let's take it from our own point of view. I've worked at places. I remember working in one office, and when I came back from whatever break, or having not been back in the office for a while, the removal men had been in, they had emptied all the items from one cupboard, left them on the floor, taken away the cupboards, moved the desks round, and I couldn't work for the first few hours because it was so unsettling. So, and that's me as a reasonably adjusted adult. So for children, it's going to be really, really difficult. This next suggestion is something that might be useful for schools and parents to do. And if parents do it, it will be useful for schools. And if schools suggest it for parents, then that will be useful because they'll be able to get the information. Here's the idea. It's a My Going Back to School book. And it can have all sorts of useful information in. Hopefully it will be something that would be produced by somebody. I would produce one, but it probably needs to be a bit more school specific, and you'll need different ones for kind of reception year 1 and year 6 and year 7 and year 12 and whatever. So it's really the idea of doing it rather than having the format for it, but it could have perhaps sections on I am looking forward to seeing, or I have missed such and such. That could be another page. Or I can help at school by, and then we could put some ideas in. Another section could be how I wash my hands. Another section could be what I did during lockdown. And then for older children, it could be what I did during lockdown. Yeah. What helped me when I was at home could be another section. These are just headings that are suggestions. They're not something that needs to be in, or would be useful for most of them to be in. This one is probably an important one for school and children, and parents. But you'll understand when I say it. What I would like my teacher to know about my worries, or for older children, my anxieties, or whatever. This book can then be shared with a class teacher, because there's lots of information in there that might be useful for a class teacher. You could just take photos of it and send it in to the class teacher, although will they be happy if they're inundated with like 15 or 30 times 5 pages over the internet? I don't know, but it is useful. It gives children an opportunity to share their worries. It gives a positive message, reassurance, and that notion that we are going back to school. This next one's really obvious. When your child's school provides information regarding any new school procedures, then... Oh, this one isn't obvious. I thought I was going to say something else. When your child's school provides information about new procedures, then it's often useful to role play them. So it might be that you role play, the way that the new setup, in school, walking on one side of the corridor only. Obviously, I think this is unlikely to work with the secondary age children. There may be some for whom it will, but most of it won't. But so for younger children, you might be getting them to role play different scenarios within school that illustrate the new rules and routines within the school, and for this reason, it's really important for schools to provide as much information as possible, and for parents to ask for as much information as possible. It could be that you're asking a question that school hasn't thought about at all, and that other parents haven't thought about at all, but is really crucial. So I think all things are valid. We are at the moment going through uncertain times, and there's no roadmap. I can't think of any other cliches, but there's a nugget of truth in all of that.